a lonely sound that carried across the dust-choked square like a warning meant for every soul in the old West town. Dawn had barely broken, yet the crowd had already gathered, boots pressed into dry earth worn thin by years of hardship. Frontier life did not allow for sleep when judgment was to be passed. In places like this, the law moved early and without mercy. She stood on the rough wooden platform, small against the gallows beam, her bare feet resting on a crate scarred by time. The noose hung close, close enough that she could feel its presence even without touching it. Her dress was plain and worn, the kind sewn by tired hands in lamplight, patched more than once. Dust clung to the hem like the land itself refused to let her go. Her face was pale, but her eyes held something harder than fear. It was the look of a woman who had learned too early how little the world promised. This old West town had never been kind to strangers, and it was cruel to women who walked alone. Folks whispered that she came from the forgotten trails beyond the river, where Native American stories mingled with settler blood and sorrow. Some said her mother had been taken in by a tribe after a wagon massacre. Others claimed she knew herbs and old ways, knowledge that frightened men who only trusted what they could hang or burn. The sheriff did not care which story was true. He only cared that the town wanted an ending. Loneliness lived deep in this place. It hid in shuttered windows and hollow eyes, in men who had buried wives under lone cottonwoods and kept writing because stopping hurt too much. It lived in children who learned early not to cry, and in women who folded grief into bread dough and called it strength. This was Western survival, and it demanded silence. He watched from the edge of the crowd, hat pulled low, hands rough and scarred from reins and rope. The widowed cowboy had arrived before sunrise, his horse lathered, his coat still smelling of night, wind, and sage. He had not planned to stop here. Towns like this carried too many memories, too much loss. But the sight of the gallows rising against the pale sky had pulled him in like a hook. He had buried his wife 3 winters back, out on a stretch of frontier life no map cared to name. Fever took her slow, and the ground froze before he could dig deep enough. Since then, he rode without direction, following work and weather, sleeping under stars that offered no answers. Love, he believed, was something the Wild West took as payment and never returned. The woman on the platform lifted her head, and for a moment her eyes met his. There was no pleading in them, only a quiet, aching resolve that struck him harder than any cry could have. He saw in her the same tired strength he had seen in his wife during the last days, when words failed but courage remained. Something in his chest tightened, a place long numb suddenly awake. The sheriff stepped forward, boots firm, badge catching the early light. He was a man shaped by rules and fear of losing control. To him, justice was simple. Trouble came in, and it had to be cut out before it spread. He read the charge aloud, voice flat, accusing her of a killing that had no witnesses and too many rumors. A man had died near the river, and Blaine needed a home. The crowd shifted, some faces turned away, others watching with grim curiosity. A few remembered her bringing water to a sick child or trading herbs for bread. Those memories stayed buried. In an old West town, mercy was a risk few were willing to take. The rope was tested. The crate was nudged closer to the edge. The cowboy took a step forward before he fully knew why. His boots sank into dust, and every eye turned toward him. He felt the weight of the years on his shoulders, the miles of forgotten trails behind him. He thought of long nights alone, of talking to the fire because silence pressed too hard. He thought of how frontier life had already taken everything that mattered. Children stood near the back of the crowd, watching with wide eyes. They would remember this day. He knew that too. The woman's hands trembled now, though she kept them still at her sides. The wind caught a loose strand of her hair, lifting it like a fragile flag of surrender. Somewhere beyond the town, a hawk cried, free and distant. He stopped just short of the platform. The sheriff looked at him with irritation, ready to bark an order. Before he could, the cowboy spoke, his voice steady but low, carrying across the square. "I'll take her place." The words fell heavy, like a stone dropped into still water. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The sheriff stared, unsure if he had heard right. The woman turned fully toward the cowboy now, disbelief and something like pain flashing across her face. He met her gaze again, and this time he did not look away. He did not know her name. He did not know if she was innocent or guilty by the town's rules. What he knew was the weight of a life already spent, and the quiet longing to make one choice that mattered. The sheriff demanded an explanation, anger rising. The cowboy had none that fit neatly into law or reason. He only knew that some debts were paid in blood and others in courage. And as the wind tugged at the rope above them, the old west town held its breath, standing on the edge of a moment that would change all their lives, one way or another. Night settled over the town like a heavy blanket, pressing down on every sound until even footsteps seemed afraid to travel far. Lamps glowed behind grimy windows, their light weak against the vast dark stretching beyond the last fence. In the cell, the woman lay awake, listening to the murmur of voices outside and the distant creak of the gallows rope as it moved with the wind. Each sound reminded her that dawn would come, and with it decisions made by men who barely knew her name. Across town, the cowboy sat alone at a small table in the back of the saloon, a tin cup cooling untouched before him. He was not much for drink anymore. It dulled memories for a moment, but sharpened them later when sleep refused to come. He watched the door instead, measuring each man who entered, wondering which of them might decide he was trouble worth removing. Offering his life had not earned him friends. It had made him a question, and questions made people uneasy. The bartender, an older man with tired eyes, finally spoke. He asked what business the cowboy had in this place. The answer came slow. He said only that he was passing through, as most men were, until the land or fate decided otherwise. The bartender nodded, understanding more than he let on. Everyone here had once been passing through. In the cell, the woman traced the scars on her palm, marks left by thorns and hard winters. She thought of her mother's voice, soft and steady, telling her that fear was natural but surrender was a choice. Those words had carried her through hunger and storms, through stares that stripped her bare. Now they felt thin against the weight of the walls closing in. A deputy came by near midnight, bringing water. He avoided her eyes, but his hand lingered a moment longer than needed on the bars. He whispered that the sheriff planned to question the cowboy in the morning. The offer he made had stirred the town more than the hanging ever would have. She thanked the deputy quietly, though dread tightened her chest. If the cowboy changed his mind, if he was pushed too hard, she would stand alone again. The cowboy slept little. When he closed his eyes, he saw the platform, the rope, her face lifted toward the mountains. He wondered what kind of life she had lived to stand so still beneath death's shadow. He wondered if he had mistaken resolve for courage, or if they were sometimes the same. His wife's face slipped into his thoughts, not as she had died, but as she had lived, laughing softly at some small thing he could no longer remember. The memory hurt, but he did not push it away. Before sunrise, the sheriff sent for him. The office smelled of ink and dust, of paperwork meant to bring order to chaos. The sheriff studied him from behind the desk, eyes sharp, searching for weakness. He asked why a man would offer his life for a stranger. The cowboy answered honestly. He said he was tired of riding past wrongs and calling it survival. He said some things were worth standing still for, even if the cost was high. The sheriff frowned. He spoke of consequences, of how one act of mercy could invite disorder. He hinted that the dead man by the river had kin, rough men who would not accept delay kindly. The cowboy listened, jaw set. He had faced angry kin before. Grief often sharpened into violence when given nowhere else to go. Meanwhile, the woman was let out briefly to wash and eat. The air felt strange on her skin after the cell, almost too wide. She caught sight of the cowboy being escorted across the square, and for a heartbeat their eyes met again. This time something warmer flickered between them, fragile as a flame in wind. It scared her more than the rope ever had. Caring meant losing, and loss was something she knew too well. She returned to the cell carrying that look with her. She tried to remind herself that he owed her nothing, that whatever he felt was his burden alone. Still, she found herself imagining what it might be like to walk beside him on one of those forgotten trails, to share silence without fear. The thought felt dangerous, almost cruel. Outside town, trouble gathered. A small group of riders watched from the rise near the river, their horses restless. They spoke of the dead man, of blood owed. They cared little for truth. In the Wild West, justice was often just another name for revenge. The delay angered them, and anger needed release. Back in town, whispers turned sharper. Some said the woman had bewitched the cowboy, that no sane man would act so without cause. Others claimed the sheriff was losing his grip, that the law bent too easily. Children were kept indoors. Doors were barred earlier than usual. Frontier life taught people to sense when storms were coming, even before the sky darkened. Late in the day, the sheriff allowed the cowboy and the woman a brief meeting. supervised, hoping perhaps that seeing each other up close would break the spell. They stood on opposite sides of the bars, close enough to feel each other's presence. Neither spoke at first. At last, the woman asked why he had done it. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook. He told her he did not have a good answer, only a true one. He said he saw someone worth saving, even if the world disagreed. She looked away, fighting tears she had not allowed herself in years. No one had said such a thing to her since her mother died. The deputy cleared his throat, reminding them of time. The moment ended too soon, leaving both of them aching with words unsaid. As the cowboy was led away, he glanced back once. She held his gaze until the door closed. That night neither slept. Fear walked beside hope, and neither could be chased off. Love, if that was what this was becoming, felt possible in the quiet spaces between them, but so fragile it might shatter with the next sunrise. Beyond the town, thunder rolled faint and distant. The land waited, as it always did, ready to test whatever choices men and women dared to make upon it. Morning broke hard and gray, the kind of dawn that carried no promise, only reckoning. Low clouds pressed against the mountains, and a chill crept through the streets, slipping under doors and into bones. The town woke uneasy. Even the birds kept their distance, as if sensing that this day would not pass quietly. The sheriff called the people together again. Word had spread that the riders by the river were kin to the dead man, and they would not wait long. Frontier life did not grant patience to grief sharpened by pride. The lawman knew he was standing on a blade's edge. If he bowed to the crowd, he would hang a woman many believed cursed. If he honored the cowboy's offer, he risked tearing the town apart. In the cell, the woman felt the shift before anyone told her. Sound carried differently. Boots struck the ground with purpose. Voices tightened. She wrapped her arms around herself and breath slow, remembering her mother's lessons. Face the fear. Name it, do not let it name you. Still, the fear rose, a tide pressing against her ribs. What she feared most was not dying. It was surviving while someone else paid the price meant for her. The cowboy stood under guard near the sheriff's office, hands free, but watched. He had offered his life, yet every moment since had tested that resolve. Courage, he had learned, was not a single act. It was choosing again each time doubt whispered a way out. He thought of riding hard before nightfall, of letting the town solve its own cruelty. The thought sickened him. He stayed. A child slipped from a doorway and paused near him, eyes wide. The child asked if he was the man who would die instead. The cowboy knelt and met that gaze. He said sometimes grown folk had to stand where they were afraid so children would learn something better. The child nodded, not fully understanding, but something settled there all the same. The sheriff finally brought them together again, not out of kindness, but necessity. He needed to see the truth of it, to measure whether this bond was real or imagined. They stood in the office, close enough to feel the weight of each other's breath. Outside, thunder murmured closer. The woman spoke first. She told the cowboy he did not owe her this. She said she had lived long enough with death beside her, and she would not have him carry it too. Her voice broke then, just a little, and he saw how much strength it cost her to stand straight. He answered softly. He said the past had already taken everything he loved. Letting it take one more piece would change nothing, but choosing to stand now might mean something. Might leave a mark that mattered. He admitted he was afraid. Afraid of hoping again. Afraid of seeing her face in his dreams, the way he still saw his wife's. The truth hung between them, raw and aching. The sheriff turned away, jaw tight. He had lost a son once, out on a drive gone wrong. The boy had believed the law would protect him. It had not. That memory rose now, unwelcome, pressing against the rules he had built to keep the world orderly. He dismissed them both, saying only that a decision would be made by sundown. Outside, the riders moved closer. They rode openly now, dust rising behind them like a warning. Townsfolk barred windows and gathered what little they owned, some prepared to flee. Others armed themselves, not sure whom they would face by nightfall. The woman was returned to the cell. Alone again, she paced the narrow space until her legs ached. She pressed her forehead to the cool bars and whispered a prayer learned from no church, words passed down by women who trusted earth and sky more than men. She prayed not for rescue, but for courage enough to choose rightly when the moment came. The cowboy was allowed to walk the square under watch. He took in every detail as if carving it into memory. The cracked well, the post where notices hung, the gallows dark against the clouds. He imagined standing beneath it, imagined the rope settling, imagined the woman watching. The thought nearly broke him. He realized then that he did not want to die, not anymore. That want terrified him more than death ever had. Late afternoon brought rain, sudden and sharp. It struck the dust into mud, grounding the air with the smell of wet earth. The riders reached the edge of town and stopped, their faces hard, eyes fixed on the gallows. They called for justice. They called for blood. The sheriff stepped out to meet them, hands raised. Words were exchanged, harsh and fast, accusations flew. The crowd gathered despite the rain, pulled by fear and curiosity alike. The woman watched from the cell window. The cowboy stood among the townsfolk, heart pounding. A cry went up. Someone shoved someone else. A gun was drawn, then another. Time seemed to slow, each breath stretched thin. The woman knew then what she had to do. She could not let this choice be taken from her, could not let more lives be broken in her name. She called out, her voice carrying through the rain. All heads turned. She said she would step forward. She would face whatever came, if it meant ending the standoff. The deputies hesitated, stunned. Across the square, the cowboy felt panic seize him. He pushed forward, shouting her name, though he barely knew it. He begged her with his eyes to stop. She met his gaze, tears mingling with rain, and gave a small, sad smile. It was a look of thanks and farewell all at once. The sheriff froze, caught between duty and dread. The riders tensed, fingers tight on triggers. Thunder cracked overhead, loud and close, as if the sky itself had chosen a side. And there, in the heart of the storm, with lives balanced on a breath, the moment held, stretched to its breaking point, leaving no one untouched and no path free of loss. The thunder rolled once more, then faded, leaving only the steady fall of rain and the sound of breath held by every soul in the square. The woman stepped forward from the cell, the deputy's hand hovering uncertainly at her arm. Mud clung to her bare feet, grounding her to the land that had shaped her suffering and strength alike. She lifted her chin and spoke again, her voice calm now, carrying farther than she expected. She said the dead man by the river had threatened her. He had come drunk and angry, believing rumors made him right. She had tried to flee. He had fallen, struck his head on stone, and never risen. She swore it by the earth beneath them and the sky above, by her mother's grave and every quiet kindness she had ever given this town. She had not raised a hand against him. Silence followed, thick and heavy. The riders shifted uneasily. One of them, older than the rest, studied her face with narrowed eyes. He asked questions, slow and sharp. Where exactly had it happened? Who else might have seen? She answered without hesitation. Truth, once spoken, had its own weight. The sheriff listened, rain streaking down his hat brim. He saw no evasion in her words, no panic, only the steady resolve of someone who had nothing left to hide. He turned then to the riders and told them what the law allowed and what it did not. He said vengeance would not bring back their kin, only more graves along forgotten trails. The older rider dismounted and walked closer, boots sinking into mud. He looked from the woman to the cowboy, who stood rigid, ready to place himself between them without thought. At last the rider sighed, a sound heavy with years. He said the dead man had always been trouble. He said anger had blinded them all. Slowly, reluctantly, he nodded. The others followed, some with bitterness, some with relief. The threat eased like a knot loosening. Guns were lowered, shoulders slumped. The storm softened, rain turning gentle, almost cleansing. The sheriff declared the matter settled. The woman was free. No rope would be used that day. The crowd began to break apart, murmuring in disbelief. Some looked ashamed, others looked thoughtful. Frontier life did not often grant second chances, but when it did, it left a mark. The woman stood still, as if unsure she was truly released. Then she felt hands on her shoulders, warm and steady. The cowboy stood before her, rain-soaked, eyes bright with something she had not seen before. Relief broke across her face, followed by tears she no longer tried to hide. He drew her into his arms, careful as if afraid she might vanish. She clung to him, grounding herself in the solid truth of his presence. Later, when the square had emptied and the rain slowed to a mist, they sat beneath the awning of the closed store. The sheriff approached, quieter now. He said the town owed them both an apology. He offered her work, honest and steady, helping families who still feared her but would learn. He offered the cowboy a place too, if he wished to stay. The land needed men who stood when it mattered. The cowboy looked at the woman before answering. He had ridden alone so long that the thought of stopping frightened him. Yet the fear felt different now, lighter. He said he would stay a while, see what grew. Days passed. The gallows was taken down, the wood reused for a new fence near the schoolhouse. Children began to follow the woman again, asking about plants and birds. She taught them what her mother had taught her, blending old knowledge with new hope. The town watched, wary at first, then slowly softer. The riders left, carrying their grief with them but leaving peace behind. The river flowed on, indifferent but no longer feared. The cowboy helped where he could. He mended roofs, broke horses, shared quiet meals with the woman beneath wide skies. At night they spoke of the past, not to reopen wounds, but to lay them gently to rest. He spoke of his wife, of love lost and the promise that had broken. She listened without jealousy, understanding that love did not erase what came before. It built upon it. She spoke of her parents, of walking between worlds, of never belonging. He listened, offering not answers but presence. Slowly, trust grew, cautious but real. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the land gold, they walked beyond the edge of town. The air smelled of sage and wet earth. He told her he had once believed survival meant moving on, never looking back. Now he wondered if survival could also mean staying, choosing, building something fragile and strong all at once. She took his hand, her grip firm. She said she had survived by standing alone, but she was tired of it. Together felt like a risk worth taking. Seasons turned. The town changed in small ways. Laughter returned to the saloon. Doors stayed open longer. Fear loosened its hold. Frontier life remained hard, but it no longer felt empty. One morning, they rode out along a trail that led past the river and into open land. Not to flee, but to see what lay beyond, knowing they could return. The mountains stood quiet, no longer a barrier but a promise. They came back by dusk, dust on their boots, smiles easy. As stars emerged, they sat side by side, wrapped in shared silence. The past still walked with them, but it no longer ruled. In a land shaped by loss and endurance, they had found something rare. Not a sudden miracle, but a love earned through hardship, through standing still when running would have been easier. And in the quiet that followed beneath endless sky,